Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Princeton Public Library. I am Janie Herman. I am here to host your event tonight with Alice Randall for her book, Black Bottom Saints, which just came out in August, and we're so thrilled to have Alice joining us here at the library. Before we get started with the official introduction, let me just go over a little bit about what's going to be happening here. Right now, the chat is open, and you can feel free to chat for the next few minutes. Let us know where you're coming from or share your favorite book. But when the actual program starts, we'll just close the chat down until the last few minutes. There is a button at the bottom where you can click in case you would like to buy the book from our partner at Laverne Books. They're a local independent bookstore, and you can click there. If you live locally here in Princeton, you can pick up the book during their open hours or curbside if you choose, or they will also ship it to you if you don't live here in Princeton. And so feel free to support your local independent bookseller. And someone just finished Long Petal of the Sea by Isabella Allende. That's a great book. Isabella is a wonderful person. We've hosted her here before. She's a great author. That's on my list to read. So yeah, feel free to chat. And also there is a button at the bottom where it says Ask a Question. And I encourage you to put your questions in there because there is going to be a question and answer period. And if you see somebody else has written a question in there that you're interested in having asked, please give it an upvote so I know to ask it. So I think that's about all that we need to know. And I think we've got people joining in here and we're ready to get started with the official program. Alice Randall is a New York Times bestselling novelist, also an award-winning songwriter, which I didn't know until I read this book, which is great, an educator and a food activist. She is a graduate of Harvard University, where she holds an honorary doctorate from Fisk University and is on the faculty at Vanderbilt. She credits Detroit's Ziggy Johnson School of the Theater with being the most influential educational institution in her life. She is widely recognized as being one of the most significant voices in 21st century African American fiction. She's presented across the nation, auditoriums, libraries, museums, ballrooms, and she even once did a talk for a group of students as they marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. In all those spaces, what she wants to do is weave together history with literature, practical wisdom, and political passion. She covers expected territory in unexpected ways, and I think we're going to find out a lot more about that in this talk tonight. Her most frequent topics include fiction writing, and literary theory, as well as soul food and cookbooks, and she has written a cookbook with her daughter. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that. And Black cocktail culture. She is known for integrating cooking demonstrations, food tastings, and even pop-up hula hooping sessions into her talks. So I really guess we wish we could have this in person instead of here online, but it's going to be a great talk, I'm sure. Her fiction has been or is currently been taught at a wide range of universities, including here at Princeton University. So without further ado, I am going to bring our guest online so that we can get going with the session. Whoopsie, one moment. And let me do that. Oh, I got to unmute you. There you go. Okay, welcome, Alice. We're so glad to have you here.
I am so glad to be here, but I wish I was shaking up a cocktail with you, with or without alcohol. But I encourage everyone to, when they read the book, to shake up cocktails and to play our Spotify playlist.
Oh, you have a Spotify playlist for this?
We have an amazing Spotify playlist with over 150 songs on it. You can find a short version. It's on my website, www.alicerandall.com or www.blackbottomsaints.com. But if you go to Spotify and look up Black Bottom Saints, you can find the deep, deep, deep dive into 150 songs from the era.
Wow, now that's what I'm going to do when I go home tonight. That is awesome. Okay, so the first question I have to ask you is, I'm going to go to my little question sheet here. In reading the book, Black Bottom Saints, I was absolutely struck how it seemed to be like very many things all at the same time. It was really quite artful. I mean, it was a history lesson, it was a celebration, a eulogy, and even a way an obituary for the eponymous Black Bottom section of Detroit in the mid-20th century. So what inspired you to write this novel and explore that era of Detroit, which was considered, to be the cultural epicenter at that time for Black music, entertainment, sports, fashion, and so much more?
That is a great question, and that is a big question. I think that I was born in Detroit in 1959, and I would say this is the novel that took me half a century of living to get, I'm 61 now, to getting to 50, and 4 previous novels to write. Because essentially, when I was about 50 and I had published 3 or 4 novels at that point, I often had gotten the question, who inspired you to want to be a writer? And also in life, I had often gotten the observation that I had had something of a very hard childhood, but I had gotten to a very hard one happy. And I realized the answer to both of those questions was Ziggy Johnson. That though I said Zora Neale Hurston and Jean Rhys and Jane Austen, all of whom, I read my first Jane Austen novel when I was in the 5th grade, were writers who were very important to me. I had wanted to be a writer since I was 3 years old. And the only writer I knew when I was 3 years old was Ziggy Johnson, who wrote for the Michigan Chronicle. And I attended his dance school, so I saw him every Saturday, and I saw him typing and talking about writing. And I also realized that when I look back on my life, and I often didn't even like to talk about it, because in some ways, literally, I'm a strong anti-death penalty person. When I hear the case being made for why some people shouldn't have the death penalty, talking about their childhood, and I'm a strong anti-death penalty person, shockingly, without going into details, often those childhoods were not quite as bad as certain aspects of mine. And I realized that the reason I had such a different outcome was Ziggy. That his school of the dance, where I didn't learn how to do any dancing, was a resiliency school. And that I had learned so much from the characters that Ziggy put in front of me. So I decided I wanted to tell that story of this man, Ziggy Johnson, who had been a gossip and entertainment columnist. He had also been an MC at the 20 Grand and the Flame Show Bar when that was the biggest club in Detroit. And he also had founded this dancing school. I wanted to tell his story, and I wanted to tell the story of his world that I was born into, but that vanished. This period of extraordinary Black excellence in the arts, in athletics, in politics, and in activism. So I set out to tell that story, and I found even bigger story than I thought I was going to get.
That's really interesting. Now, I did bring you into full screen there for a moment, because I think when we're in split screen, people can't see who is behind you. So I'm going to bring you back into full screen. Hang on, let me go out. And you can tell people.
You're there. I can bring Ziggy up.
You can bring Ziggy up? Okay.
I can
bring Ziggy up.
There we go. There is Ziggy. And this is actually a model from Hudson's department store that makes a appearance in the novel of the Penobscot building, and the top of the Flame is was a restaurant that Ziggy frequented that was in the Penobscot building.
So you have these really inspirational things here in your office to keep you going and keep you on track.
Absolutely.
And did you acquire those before you wrote the book or after you wrote the book?
I acquired them very naturally, meaning that my friends sent them to me. When I first got this crazy Penobscot building, I'm thinking, what am I going to do with this? And I realized it was perfect Zoom background and inspiration. And it is literally in the book. And when I realized that this one came from Hudson's in the 80s, it just wild that it showed up in a Nashville junk shop. And then I'm truly honored that Jimmy James Green, the artist who did the cover of my book, I'm very proud of this cover.
I love that cover.
He sent me the original study as a present, and it was shocking. But I have something really interesting that if I had been able to go on tour, one of the weird things that I did with this novel is before COVID happened, I worked with Jimmy James Green, who eventually did the cover, but that's not how I found him, to translate the entire novel into 53 collage portraits. One for almost each chapter. There are actually 61 chapters. And just to show you two, which I think are interesting, this is the brick top. This is just a little digital version of it. This is the Thomas Bullock. But to give you a far more interesting and more typical one, let me show you Laverne Baker.
Oh, that's beautiful.
I love the Laverne Baker, that at the bottom, this cotton is going to be indicative of the fact that she used to perform as a Little Miss Sharecropper because she wanted to honor the people who were left behind in Mississippi and Alabama. You're going to see that she's going to travel, go into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. This USO thing is going to indicate that she's going to leave the United States and go to the Philippines because she has so much of her own art stolen from her by a woman called Georgia Gibbs, that these collage portraits sort of distill the chapters. And we actually have an online digital museum with all 53 portraits in them. And if you click on them, you get my favorite quotation from each chapter, and you find out who each person is a patron saint of. So I'm only telling at virtual events where the digital museum is. So your guest today can find out where it is, which is, you go to www.alicerandall.com, go to the press page, go to the very bottom of it where there's some addresses, and you'll see some flashing cards like this. It looks like flash, flash, flash. Double click on the flashing cards and give it about a minute and a half to download. And it's an entire 3D museum that you can spend as much time as you want with it. And
that's amazing. So yeah, so I was really interested because I mean, it reads. This book is both a novel, but it's nonfiction. It's kind of a hybrid. I'm not quite sure how to describe it, but Ziggy Johnson, the protagonist, is a real person, or was a real person, as were the individual saints profiled. And so, you know, as I read, I found myself Googling for more information about them, and as a librarian would do. And I kept thinking that this is a wonderful thing, that when a novel or story or a book propels you to want to do more research. But I mean, how long did it take you to do all the research for this novel so that you can remain historically accurate while still building a compelling and narrative storyline? So like, you know, you want to be historically accurate about the people, but you wanted to compel people to keep reading as if it was a story and not just, you know, an encyclopedia of profiles. So how did you come to that style?
great question. First of all, it is a Saints' Day book. Yeah, the formal word for that, hagiography. It is lives, it's 61 profiles. Some people have compared it to Profiles in Courage. Some people have compared it to the Canterbury Tales. But it is also a novel, and it is historical fiction, because though the facts in it, to the degree that they are known, are accurate, but remember, it's all through the lens of Ziggy writing on, the conceit of the novel is Ziggy on his deathbed in the last days of 1967 and the first days of 1968, writes a hagiography to save the life of one little girl and to gather together all the cultural wisdom. So that is the structure of the book as a Saints' Day book. And I'll get to back in a moment to why I chose that structure. But it took me, when I decided to write Ziggy's story 10 years ago, when I was about 50, it took me 7 years of research, 3 years of writing to write this book. And the first 2 years of research were absolutely in the basement of a library research, cranking microfilm, because the Michigan Chronicle from that period to this day has not been digitized. And originally I didn't even know if Ziggy really had written this column, because I had even some prominent scholars tell me they had never heard of Ziggy Johnson as a writer, that they knew of Ziggy Johnson as a dancer, as an MC. He appears in a lot of different archives because he's a friend of a lot of people. And so you'll find a publicity shot of him in this archive or that archive, or a picture with some other famous person. But people kept on telling me I was confusing him with someone else. But I knew that my father, when I was a little girl in Detroit, used to read to me from the newspaper, 3 newspapers a week. My favorite was the Michigan Chronicle. And I knew I remembered a Ziggy Johnson column. And lo and behold, I have to send, and we could find, I think, I can't remember this, 11 copies of microfilm. It was a project in the early 70s in the rise of Black power and Black studies, that there had been some grant to microfilm, not digitize, the Michigan Chronicle. And it was spread out in maybe 11 libraries.
Wow.
And we had to track down, Vanderbilt wasn't one, but it was with one of our sister libraries, and get that sent to me. And wild, when all the little microfilm boxes came, most of them had, in fact, I think all of them have never been opened before. They had been sitting there since 1970 something. And so I had to start randomly going through them because I didn't know when, once a month, once a week, when these columns might appear or not appear. And I started finding them. And then I continued, and I actually found one day my own birth announced in one of Ziggy's columns. Yes.
Well, how was your birth announced in that?
Ziggy said, little Deborah Jean it's a little sister, Mary Alice, literally my name, Mary Alice, I have to look up, Mary Alice Randall, George and Betty, and it mentioned my half-sister as a little sister.
Wow.
Randall. But so what I first did was I had to photograph those individual pages and Xerox them, and one by one, which was a tedious job in the bottom of a basement in the summer in Nashville.
You didn't hire an intern to do that?
No, I actually did it over the course of I can't even remember, it was off and on for 2 summers. And so, and of course I was researching other things as I was doing that, but essentially and then I did realize that some of the columns were republished differently in the Chicago Defender and the Pittsburgh Courier. So ultimately I had, depending on how you looked at it, as to what an original column was, 800 to 1,000 columns over a 20-year period. And the last of which was published a week after he died. He wrote literally up into his death. That's how important the columns were to him. And so I started recreating Ziggy's world, which was one of the most fun parts, based on those columns. I started going through the 1,000, making a list of every single bar that he mentions, every single person. He uses code names for a lot of people and even certain things. When he says someone's going to college, it turns out that means they're going to prison. Although colleges and universities are also mentioned. He put some people in under pseudonyms that were really hard to track down initially. Some were just nicknames that were known at the time, such as Kingfish, that aren't particularly well known now, which is out of context. So that was my first challenge, to determine who could be one of Ziggy's saints, who was important to Ziggy, what was important to Ziggy's world. When I was first writing the novel, it was going to be a year in Ziggy's life, a straight novel that every once a year, I told you, he had a dancing school, a school of the theater. He would have this extravaganza on Father's Day, in which all the kids would participate. It was almost like a W.E.B. Du Bois pageant, a cross between that and some kind of dancing school recital on steroids. And when I mean on steroids, Sammy Davis Jr., the Mills Brothers, the Temptations, the Supremes would not only come to participate in it and dance with Ziggy's kids. Marvin Gaye loved to be in the audience and watch it. This was just this amazing panoply of Black musical dance and achievement in history, all on Father's Day. So the original idea was to do 1 year from one Father's Day to another. When I started writing 4 years ago, it was a very broken time in American history. It was the beginning days of the Trump administration. And I realized that we needed a book of virtues. I realized that we were in a very broken time, and this whole project of my novel, that Ziggy knew so much and put so many people before us who knew a lot about moving from trauma to transcendence. And he also knew a lot about looking past superficial crimes, minor crimes, to see deep virtues. And that is what I thought the time required. And it came to me almost as a gift, but also I love forms. My very first novel was written in the form of a diary. My second novel was written in the form of a suicide note. My third one in a Black spy novel. My fourth was a diet book that functioned as a serious literary fiction novel. So I like working with novels that are written, cross-written in another genre. So it came to me, this one would be a Saints Day book, and that the saints would all meet 3 tests. 1, Ziggy loved them as indicated by the fact that he had talked about them repeatedly in one of his columns. So I could place them in a Ziggy column. 2, the Black Detroit, Black Bottom is a geographic place as well as a state of mind. And the center of this place was a hotel called the Gotham Hotel that Langston Hughes had pronounced the greatest Negro hotel in the world. So I could place them in the lobby of the Gotham Hotel to be one of the saints. And the third and most important thing is that Ziggy believed, and I believe, because Ziggy, these are people that he had introduced to me directly or indirectly in my real life, that these people knew something about trauma to transcendence specifically. If they met all 3 of those tests, they were a saint. And I started off with 100 people that met that test, and I was trying to figure it out to be 52 weeks. But I decided I had to add some movable feasts because I truly could not get it down past 61 saints. After 61, there are some people I just could not kick off Saint Island. So we added some movable feasts, and I got in all 61. And Eartha Kitt is the secret saint. And that is because people say, why isn't Eartha a real saint? It's because when you read her chapter, saints are useful to other people. And Eartha had been used so often and so poorly by others, she didn't want to be used, and Ziggy wouldn't want her to be used. So that's why Eartha is a secret saint. You have to figure out what chapter she appears in. I can't hear you.
I'm sorry, I had to mute. I'm here in the library and I had the vacuum cleaner on. I muted myself. I'm gonna have to go back now and figure out. I read the advanced reader's copy and I have to go back and look for Eartha. My favorite Eartha story is that I saw her perform as the Wicked Witch of the West in The Wizard of Oz when she was in San Francisco.
Ooh, and she's also, I worked on the movie Boomerang, which was directed by Reggie Hudlin, who also makes an appearance in this book, and Eartha Kitt is in Boomerang. And Eartha, is in the chapter with the labor leader in it. I will just.
Okay. So other than Eartha then, do you have a favorite saint that you wrote about? Or maybe 2, because it sounds like you have a lot. Was there one saint that just kind of like sticks with you?
So many. I love Ethel Waters is an important saint to me because she's Ethel Waters is a very important saint. There's actually right now my absolute favorite saint, it changes all around, is Lynette Dobbins Taylor.
Okay.
Lynette Dobbins Taylor is my favorite saint right now because she's a Kamala Harris saint. Lynette Dobbins Taylor is the first Black woman in history to dance with an American president at his inaugural ball. She will actually, her husband will be credited with inventing the phrase affirmative action, but I think Lynette had a little something to do with inventing that phrase herself. And she had a very profound understanding of affirmative action that begins in 1933 in Alabama, in her when her father drowns in a lake, and she's in that same lake with her brother, and Lynette Dobbins takes dramatic action in the chapter, hitting her brother upside the head with a stick to knock him unconscious so she can save him.
Wow.
And that was, I said, in Detroit, we got a little bit different idea of what affirmative action is.
Yeah.
And that was Lynette Dobbins. She watched her father die and she got over it.
Mm-hmm.
She was 14 years old when he died. She started college a few months later, and 4 years later, she would not even be 20 when she would be teaching in her own classroom. And she would become a principal, and people forget her.
Mm-hmm.
He and Hobart Taylor's father was a millionaire out of Texas. He himself was a millionaire, Black millionaire. They invented that whole part of that campaign all the way with LBJ. And people don't realize that it was Black Americans that worked very hard and effectively to put LBJ in office. Over 5,000 were at the inauguration. And Hobart Taylor actually was so credited by helping put LBJ in office. He co-chaired the inauguration. The woman's name gets put to the side, but she did get her dance with the American president. And I say the way Kamala Harris is standing with Biden today is the way Lynette Dobbins Taylor stood with LBJ. And I hope
okay,
to the
that
White
is okay. Yep, I think I'll have a new favorite saint for a while there too, as well. Then, so that's a great story, and the book is just filled with so many stories like that, and so many people who, would have otherwise maybe been forgotten to history.
Here's one for you, Janie. This is Sadie Pryor. She's one of my absolute favorite ones. Sadie is a librarian.
Yes, I did note that you had a librarian saint in there.
And you notice her building in the card is books. It's a book.
Yeah.
Sadie is also a woman, is an environmentalist. She is a woman who actually worked to get lifeguards for the Black beaches in Florida. There have been a lot written about the desegregation of beaches and wade-ins, but not much has been written about that. Often, once these beaches were desegregated, there was no funding for lifeguards, so Black bodies and child bodies were actually in more danger.
Wow.
Pryor, with her little pearls around her neck and her little black dresses, being so polite, using administrative details and smiles, will wear down racist legislators until they give those beaches, those lifeguards for the Black beaches.
Yeah.
Too forgotten to history. But what she knew, like Ziggy, was that the most powerful places to educate a child are not necessarily in the classroom. Libraries and dancing schools have been doing that hard work for decades.
That is great. So I just want to actually touch on something here, because I know we have some Princeton people here in the audience, and one thing that struck me now, and people can usually tell from my accent that I'm from Canada. So, there's certain parts of American history that I'm not aware of, or American culture, although I've lived here long enough that I'm getting pretty caught up to speed. But, I wasn't aware of this whole Black Bottom area of Detroit as a cultural center for the longest time. And, but then in reading about how, it was torn down for progress and decimated. And here in Princeton, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, we had pretty much the same thing. As we had a very rich, historically Black neighborhood right in the center of town across the gates from the university that was torn down for progress to make what's now known as Palmer Square. And they basically took that, but what they did in this instance was just took it and kind of like relocated everybody, several blocks away and made them a new neighborhood so that the area across from the university could be developed. This was also in the 60s. And there's still a lot of, around town, we still talk about this, and there's still resentment how this happened. And so how was Detroit handled this? And how did the people who lived in Black Bottom district, do they still talk about it and remember it? Because the original, a lot of the people who would have been there have probably moved on or not, or is it still?
Well, you are onto so much with that question. So one, Black Bottom, the neighborhood that we are speaking of, as we all know, setting is time and place. So depending on what decade you're talking about, Black Bottom is different things inhabited by different people. But in the period that we're talking about, 38 to 68, is in the Lower East Side of Detroit. It's on the river. It actually looks out onto Canada. One of the things that people forget about Detroit is a border town. Mm-hmm. It's an international border town. And that was very important to the history of Black Detroit because of the proximity to Canada for freedom in the Underground Railroad days, but it's also proximity to Canada during the Vietnam War days. So it's a Lower East Side neighborhood that, with anxieties about post-World War II Black prosperity, we start getting, in the name of urban renewal, what was called Negro removal, decimation of Black neighborhoods. And so we start getting Mies van der Rohe townhouses built where had been 80% Black home ownership in Detroit at its height. 80% of the Black adults in Detroit owned their own homes. This is related to the auto industry. Now, what we talk about in the novel, that what's important about this is the audience. That if you go and work on an assembly line all day, and remember when River Rouge and these big plants were going 24/7, the show bars, the taverns, the blind pigs, the illegal after hours clubs are also going 24/7. Not every one of them is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, but some of them, some large number of them are literally open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There has never been in American history a city with more live music than was available in Detroit in this time period. At the same time, because there were so many clubs as opposed to Harlem or Bronzeville, the Black neighborhood in Chicago, in Harlem at the top clubs, there were always a certain percentage of the audience, 10, 15, maybe more percent, that was white at all the clubs. In Detroit, there were so many clubs. There were any night you wanted to be watching music with an all-Black audience. And what this is about is not racism, but a Black aesthetic, a musical aesthetic, a comedic aesthetic, a dress aesthetic. You could watch music in the presence of an all-Black audience where the art was being measured by an all-Black aesthetic and nothing was being translated to appeal to white taste. Because there would be 15% of the clubs where there would be lots of white folk. And of course, they would come to see Billie Holiday. They come to see Laverne Baker. And it wasn't, but there was an opportunity for artist treasures to develop their art in relation to 100% Black aesthetic and sharpen their skills in that particular cradle of Sepian creativity. That existed nowhere else. And it wasn't just about the music, because the Gotham Hotel, they start have national and local photography clubs. We get Artist Lane, who will get her sculpture of Sojourner Truth in the Capitol by the Obamas, but her first collection of paintings will hang in the Gotham Hotel, be oil paintings of prominent Black Detroit citizens. So it is painting, it are murals, it is music, it is dance, it is actually autobiography. Ethel Waters, I was going to say, is one of my favorite saints because she wrote her own autobiography twice. And when people weren't talking about rape, she narrated her own mother's rape in the first one. Didn't use a ghostwriter, writes her own autobiography twice. I love that. So she will launch her book. Sammy Davis, when he does Yes, I Can, his autobiography that he did use a ghostwriter on, he will launch that book in Detroit with that all-Black audience. He will perform a lot of his early important plays in Detroit. Lloyd George Richards is a very important saint to me. Lloyd George Richards starts off as a Detroit shoeshine boy. His father worked on an assembly line. His mother was a maid until she got stricken with blindness. He will become the dean of the Yale School of Drama. He will direct Raising the Sun when it opens on Broadway for the first time. And he will discover, produce, and direct many of August Wilson's plays.
Wow.
Lloyd George Richards starts in Detroit City. He was a breadwinner's son. That is what I call the people who worked on the assembly lines. And he will get his start directing plays, including plays from the international repertory of playwrights in Detroit for those all-Black audiences. This leads him to August Wilson. This leads him.
Yeah.
This anchors him when he's doing Razor in the Sun. It's undiluted aesthetic. And who knows that, who remembers that he starts off as a shoeshine boy in Detroit City, as is the labor leader, Mark Stepp. So I'm excited. I obviously do care about this time and space, but the other way that I care about it is the roots of Black feminism. When I was born in Detroit in 59, the census was in 60. We're going through a census now. There were approximately, I believe the number is about 130,000 Black girls in Detroit in 1960 under 18. in a city with less than 600 older Black women over 75. The roots of what we call Black girl magic run straight to Detroit, and both didn't stay in Detroit. They have moved around all over the country. They have become women who are literally top oncological surgeons, who are lawyers, who are doing doctors, who are teachers, who are doing all kinds of work with a Black bottom, self-invention and defiance, chin-up spirit, exporting that, literally, these roots of Black girl magic. Because actually, as far I've mined the census data, and I've not had anyone be able to prove this wrong, though I am not a data miner, that the largest collection of Black girls ever to live in one city in America lived in Detroit in 1960.
Wow. So yeah, so complex when you start thinking about it. Now, before we move on to the reading, I got just want to get to the part of the book that's so interesting. And so you also have this background as in food. You did what was the title of the cookbook you did it with your daughter?
Food Love won the it won the Pat Conroy Award and the NAACP Image Award.
Right. So you love food, but you also love cocktails, and so that's included in this book, which is so fun. As I was reading it, I was making notes of some that I would like to sample myself, although a lot of them involve gin, and I'm not a big fan of gin, but that's another topic. So did you actually sample each cocktail before you put it in?
Absolutely, multiple times. And I'm not a big drinker, and when I was sampling them, I would put a straw in and just taste them. But yes, I am very interested in cocktail culture, and particularly with this book for multiple reasons, but one being Thomas Bullock is a Black man who will publish The Ideal Bartender in about 1917. He is one of the saints in the book. And what I want people forget that cocktails were an expressive art going back to the 19th century, because we have Bullock publishing his book in 1917 when he's a well-established bartender. So he's establishing himself in the 19th century, publishing in the 20th century, a Black man. And one of the models for this book, my novel, is the Saints' Day book, the hagiography. The other is Bullock's book itself. And I wanted to pay homage to Black expressive culture, such as the cocktail, that is not recognized as expressive culture. And or the little necklace the little girl makes in the Tanya Blanding chapter with the now a letter later, which is the candy wrappers. But these, but cocktails are extremely important, the libations, as they're called in the book. And some of them don't have liquor in them because they allow for the aesthetic of the book to enter into the reader's life. And the aesthetic of the book includes an address to all five senses: to taste, to smell, to touch, to sight, to sound. This is the aesthetic Ziggy inherits from the Catholic Church. His mother is from the Catholic Church in Natchez, Mississippi. It's the aesthetic that he has translated into a love of the show world. In the book, how you include that is a cocktail, because the shake, 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 or the tinkle when you hit the stir on the side of the glass, it's a sound. The scent is coming. Many of these things are garnished with fruit and fruit peels and a variety, and mint, things that have a strong scent. The taste is obvious, the feel of them, their multiple textures, and the visual of these cocktails, all very, very strong. And so it translates the aesthetic that Ziggy found in the church, takes to the secular world, and then comes into a cup. This is particularly of importance because the theme of the novel is joy is radical. How do you have a novel that is addressing trauma to transcendence, that looks at both public and private trauma, and keep it joyful? The cocktails keep it joyful, not because of the spirits in them. Certain ones, particularly say Tanya Blanding or the Clean and Sober, many of them don't have spirits in them, but all of them have the multiple sense address. All of them claim that even in our moment of mourning, we are invited to find the joy. to spot to hard one, because joy is radical.
Oh, I love that. That's just great. Joy is radical. On that note, I'm going to invite you right now to read your prepared passage. And while you're doing that, I'm going to encourage our audience members to ask their questions for the question and answer period. So we're going to have a reading. So tell us where you're reading from, and we're going to all sit back and enjoy.
Well, I think actually I'm going to read, because I'm at a library and because I love this piece, I think I'm going to read you a little bit from Sadie Pryor and about the time when she gets to go and visit Ziggy. Ziggy said each chapter is structured with an entry by CG, which is, she's sort of Ziggy's last editor, and then it goes into the actual chapter that profile that Ziggy has written, and then it's followed by a libation. And so I'm going to read you just one paragraph from CG's introduction. Ziggy said she played low not because she feared white men, but because she loved Black children. Ziggy had stock phrases that he repeated, classic lines that worked, so he recycled them year after year to different classes. One was, when I go, I'm not leaving you anything in my will, but that doesn't mean I don't love you. With warm hands, I give you my sister Sadie. She was in the center of the story passed down from class to class about the one time any of the students at the Ziggy Johnson School of Theater had seen Ziggy cry. He was telling the Tuesday ballet ladies about Sadie hanging her head and letting her voice quiver to win life-saving lifeguards for the Black Beach in Pensacola, Florida. Sadie came up to visit Detroit in 1962. Now we're in Ziggy's voice. She saw me in action, met some of my students. One night I took her out to a bar where she had 3 cocktails and smoked a cigarette. I was stunned. They don't see it, Sadie said. What? I asked. When they focus on our social climbing, they don't see the children we are lifting over the wall, hard, hungry, and able children, prepared by us to make the Bible promise an earthly reality. The last shall be first. To the last being first. We clink glasses and toasted to being complicit in each other's successful creation of cradles of Sepian excellence. We were not coordinated, but we were complicit. That night was the first and only time we got drunk together. She on 3 glasses, me on 5. We saved the best for last. This book was born in the aftermath of that toast. Sadie took a second sip, looked at the crowd, which included Massey, Bodywork, Shirley, Maxine, and Scatterbrain, and said, "They are not your friends, nephew. They are your black-bottom saints. The way you talk about them inspires me to proceed." Christmas time 3 years ago, 1964, there was Sadie E. Pryor night in Pensacola. I should have been there, but I was working, and had I attended, she wouldn't have known what to do with me in one of my light-colored silk suits. She was president of the PTA. She was principal of Spencer Gibbs Elementary. She helped found the Black YMCA and the C.B. Nelson Daniels Chapter 172 of the Eastern Star, and was installed as a worthy matron. She was a national leader of Girl Scouts. If I sound proud, it is because I am, and she always played humble. Sadie knew Black girls made miracles because she had been a Black girl making miracles. Every day, in every club she worked alongside Black women who had been, but not acknowledged as being shamans. Some came from hoodoo, some from conjure, some from voodoo, but they stood on the shores of colored girl mystery, M-I-S-T-E-R-Y, that shrouded territory where misery is converted to mystery and power. Watching Sadie work with her club women sisters to finally win in 1953 a beach that welcomed Black kids to swim without also winning lifeguards that the white beaches had started me on a road of discovery. Watching her continue to work against well-moneyed, elected, racist men eager to invite Black bodies into danger took me further down that discovery road as I heard about her grinding city commissioners down with silly questions, administrative technicalities, and treacle sweet pleasantness. She had mother wit. It took mother wit to finally get the lifeguards the colored kids needed and deserved. Girls and women will be increasingly the key to maintaining Black identity as we Black folk begin to enter new, predominantly white spaces with new difficulties and new dangers. Integration brought evil as well as good. Sadie saw this, told me over drinks at the Sir John Hotel. We need the magic box of your dancing school to intensify their soul selves, their own inner magic box. She clutched the pearls at her neck when she said this next. A string of pearls can be a shield. A dancing school can be a lifeboat. So much gets diluted when we enter white space.
Wow.
In honor of you, Janie.
Yes, that's a beautiful passage. And there's just so much more beautiful passages throughout. Now, we don't really have a very question-asking audience tonight. We have people on here with us, but they're not asking questions. But that's okay, because I always have lots of questions myself. But I do encourage you, if you have a question. So, this is often common. Are you working on a new project, or did this one kind of take so much energy that you're just putting it all into promoting it?
Right now, I'm really interested in going out around the country and having discussions with people about Black Bottom Saints. But of course, I will be doing some new projects. But for example, I've met with some of the Black Lives Matter leaders at Harvard, and we had an entire pop-up around the Tanya Blanding chapter. And one of the things I think that's exciting about this book is you don't have to start on page 1 and read straight through. You talked about Googling as you go along. That was the plan. The plan was to provide enough information for people to start their own adventure. And also that if you're interested in knowing something more about Dinah Washington, maybe read the Night Train Lane chapter. If you are concerned about Say Her Name or want to know more about that, you read Tanya Blanding. If you are concerned about challenges to mental health, you may be interested in the Elsa Roxborough chapter. If you are trying to figure out how to be a better friend, you might read the Kingfish chapter. Generally speaking, the first section of the novel, The Saints of Summer, are saints about the roots of the Black experience. I particularly love Butterbeans and Susie. When they begin, when they begin performing, they could look out at their audiences and actually see whip marks on faces from the enslaved. They will invent modern couples comedy. Gracie and Alan will owe so much to them. They will be important blues writers. They themselves will launch more careers probably than the Apollo Theater. And again, who remembers Butterbeans and Susie today? I love, let me see if I could quickly.
I think helping people discover all these, well, they're not just Black Bottom Saints, but some of them are forgotten saints, and to have them brought back to life for us in this way is a treat. And I did put, and I know we've had some people join us since you first said that, I put in the chat alicerandall.com/contact, because as Alice said, if you go to that page, there's actually 2 things that are there. One is the Spotify playlist where you can explore the music, the soundtrack of this book while you drink your cocktails. But then if you scroll down, just right to the bottom, as she said, there is these flashcards. If you go in there, you'll get to go and see all of the different saints and their collages. Oh, and someone here wants to know then, what is the influence of Black Bottom on Motown?
That's really interesting. Anna Gordy, who was Berry Gordy's sister, is one of the saints. Basically, the Motown era, Motown and I were born in the same year, 1959. The year before that, Anna Records existed for a year, and it actually, again, gets forgotten. Motown is only actually in Detroit for a little bit less than a decade before, right in that first decade that it opens 59, 60, by the end of the 60s, it's already, Berry Gordy is moving out to Los Angeles and becoming an international and global figure. So it is a last flower of that old Black Detroit, but it's actually a very different thing because Berry Gordy is taking Black music and making it the quote unquote sound of young America, making it a very global and whole world sound. Black Bottom, as celebrated in this book and as existed from 38 to 68, was a much more insular, all Black world related to a Black audience. And that, I want to read you this little tiny paragraph from Butter, Beans, and Susie. Proud and dirty, Butter and Sue style was delicious. Pride, respect, and sex were the snap, crackle, and pop that pervaded their onstage arguments and humiliations. Just when you thought they had gone too far with the insults and would fall into the shit-paying pit, they would fall into the shit pit of shame-fueled minstrel laughter. They jumped right back into the honeypot of love. Despite the pitch dance and the blackface, despite his too small bowler hat, because of her big hips and his crazy lips, any fool could see. They bent the notes to sing. She had a roll and he had a hat dog that just fitted. Every audience was wooed into believing Butter, Beans, and Susie were luckier than anyone else in the world. And they made many a body in the audience believe they could be that lucky too. And they themselves could be loved. And they themselves could be loved. Butter and Sue's act was all about the war between the sexes, but it was also about the war between the races. Hidden in every Butter and Sue stage fright was a love letter that read, "We appreciate each other even when the white world doesn't." And their act wasn't just about love. It was about sex. The church preached that sex would kill you. Butter and Sue preached on the minstrel show, on the vaudeville stage, on the Apollo stage, that sex can save you. That was a radical sermon. Butter and Sue were all about loving each other and about protecting each other when the white world didn't. And that's what I adore about their act. And actually what makes them better than that couple, Gracie, that whole thing, because it makes them better than Shakespeare in some ways. They keep getting back to the mutual respect. It's not the domination of the man over the woman ultimately that resolves it. It is the mutual respect.
Yeah, they were another couple, but I did actually look them up, and this was like, you can just find so much information. Here I am being the librarian always. I'd never heard of Butter, Beans, and Susie, and brought them right back, and it's like, they have an important role to play, and
very important. I mean, they are actually extraordinarily important. Who was your favorite saint? Did you have one that you liked?
I actually really was fascinated with Tom Bullock myself, and the influence that he had, and that, as you said, that he could have started out and done this and written this book. I actually went and looked up the original book and did quite a bit of research on him. I liked your librarian saint as well. She's, I noticed that right away that there was a library. When I first got the book, I went through and I saw that you were doing patron saints of different things. I thought, is there a patron saint for librarians in here? And I was like really happy to find that. Yeah. I really related to, just, and also I think, having, being a Catholic myself, this was not an unfamiliar format to me, the Saints' Days, and looking through this, and I just thought, but it's so much more than that. It's actually, I was going to read here a second. This might be a good way to close it out. Before I read this, the word Sepian, is that a word that is commonly used in Detroit?
It's commonly used in Ziggy's columns. And so,
Okay.
and there was a Black magazine, many of you are familiar with Ebony magazine, but there was one called Sepia. And so, yes, it was a positive Black insider word to describe Blackness that is respectful. And but it's a little bit of an insider world. All of the Zibby, and including that word mystery, M-I-S, as a combination of misery and mystery, was a Ziggy word. Those are words that Ziggy did use.
Okay. So I think we're going to just end here with this. I love NPR's review that came out just before the book was, right around the time the book was published. Two things that it said is, number one is that Bullock's feast day cocktail is called the Blue Blazer, which is whiskey, sugar. I was surprised how many of them involve sugar cubes. Whiskey, sugar, lemon peel, and then mash to set the whole concoction aflame. I liked that. But then I liked the closing sentence is that Black Bottom Saints is a gorgeous swirl of fiction, history, and motor oil. There is plenty of cocktail recipes here to make the rougher stories go down a little smoother. So that I thought that perfectly encapsulates the book in a sentence. And when I get brave enough, I'm going to make myself a blue blazer.
Now that's what I have to say. Don't do that because it actually involves pouring flames. We've done it. I cannot encourage you to actually make that drink because it's dangerous. But I have made it, but I'm not encouraging that. If you go to the www.blackbottomsaints.com, there's a Who's the Saint You Need Now test that you can quiz, and it will tell you. And remember, you can go to the museum if you find it hidden on the press kit page at the bottom, and you can see all 52 Jimmy James Green collage portraits, or at least digital versions of them. And I think that it's fun. I remember that for book clubs, one of the things we're finding that people, if you're interested in film, you could read the Ethel Waters or the Scatterbrain Stevens chapter. You can assign one chapter that everyone's going to read, and then people can read randomly, so that you know that everyone can go deep on one chapter. And so it's really fun because right now we're going through a hard time where people are exhausted and don't have, but joy is radical and reading does revive. And I think that having these short texts, some of the chapters are as short as 3 pages, none are longer than 11 pages. Most of them are 3, 4, 5, 6 pages, that people are loving dipping in and out. So I encourage you to be good to yourself, amen. I would love to close by saying Laverne Baker is one of my favorite saints, as I told you. And she did an entire album, a secret I didn't put in the book, of Bessie Smith songs in 1957. And Bessie Smith had a wonderful song called Nashville Women Blues. Those Nashville women, the way they strut, it ain't no bluff. And I think she was talking about Lil Hardin Armstrong, this Black woman who played on those early country hits like Blue Yodel No. 9. I sort of had taken that as one of my theme songs, the Nashville Women Blues. I wouldn't have known that. It took Laverne Baker and Angela Davis and her beautiful book about blues women to get me to learn that. And I feel like that's the last part of the secret sauce of how I wrote this book. It took Ziggy, it took Laverne, it took Angela Davis to help me realize I was a blues novelist and the tradition in which I was working, that no life couldn't be centered into this story. These characters come from every walk of Black life. I love Shirley MacNeille, PhD, who brought transcendental meditation to the United States and meditation, period, into public school classrooms. This woman, Black woman with a PhD, I want to shout out to her in Princeton. That's the saint that your Claudia Tate from the psychology department, the English department at Princeton would have loved so much. And because Claudia in the English department was so interested in analysis and psychology and Black women's lives and literature and Black writers' lives. So I'll close on Shirley MacNeille, that surprising saint, this Black woman who brings transcendental meditation to the United States. and gets her story erased from our history. It's now rewritten back in our fiction, and I hope some historians will chase down these stories, but more importantly, I hope that young people and old people, that old heads and new voices will be sustained by these lives of people who know, are very wise about rising from the ashes, because we all as a country and as a globe are rising from ashes right now.
Yes, we are. Thank you, Alice. This has been an absolute pleasure. So informative. And we have actually here at the library a Black Voices book group, and they meet regularly. And I am going to be recommending this as one of their reads for next year. They choose a couple of months in advance, but I think this would be a book very much enjoyed by them. And maybe when we do, I'll have to have you come back on and talk to them a bit, because you bring this book, talking to you, reading the book is a great experience, but talking to you and having you bring it to life like this makes me want to go. I think I might have to go back and just reread some of the saints again, as I said, and find out more about them. And it's really inspiring. And I think you will inspire, and I think you will inspire young voices and to get out there and find out more about the people who came before them. And that,
like the saints from their community. I hope.
Yes.
That's another last thing. We do have free lesson plans that I have invested some truly top scholars from Vanderbilt and Harvard to write up lesson plans from middle school and high school, because and we have the free chapters with them. You just have to email me and request those, but they go down to the PowerPoints, because I care about teachers. This is not this. I care about teachers. I care about people feeling that they write their stories of their community. I want to hear the saints of that community across from Princeton that got eradicated.
Witherspoon Jackson is now called the Witherspoon Jackson neighborhood, and we do have a historical society there. We are doing some oral histories with them called the Voices of Princeton. We are capturing those stories from that neighborhood, because that neighborhood is so important to Princeton. I mean, the Witherspoon Jackson neighborhood is the people of that neighborhood, but the people who made Princeton University possible. They are the groundskeepers. They are the cooks. They are the people who keep that university running. And now more and more, they are the faculty and the staff. And you can see, as you said, that growth from the breadwinners and going up. But they're the fabric of this town, and they've been here for a long time.
And I want to embolden some creative writers to engage creatively in that history, because the imaginative part of the life, because many of the people, like the original gardeners, they may not have been able to write down there. They might have been so weary from working. They did not write a lot of record. And so we have to, not have to, but I invite us to dance with our imagination, with history, knowing the difference. This is literary fiction. This is historical fiction. And there's a complete role for the historian, all different ilks of historian. But there is room to also imagine our way in and breathe a new, different life into those lost lives.
Oh, you're so inspirational. Thank you so much. Our hour is up. And thank you. And so, yes, Black Bottom Saints, buy it from Labyrinth Books. The link is right there. You can just hit right there, put it in your cart, and you will have it. And thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
And bye-bye, everybody.